Hello Year 11s. In this first video I'm just going to be giving you a discussion or discussing what is meant by the term inflation and how we measure inflation within Australia. So basically inflation occurs when there is a sustained increase in the general or average level of prices in an economy. So it's basically just meaning that the average level of prices, so when you go to the supermarket or you go to buy a car or anything that you purchase as a consumer, the average price of products is going up compared to last year. So inflation means it's becoming dearer to buy most goods and services and money is gradually losing its purchasing power. The real value of money is starting to fall. Okay? It doesn't mean that every single good or service has to be going up in price, but the general level of prices is increasing. There are three terms you need to be aware of in relation to inflation. So inflation is when the average level of prices is increasing. Deflation is when there is a decrease in the average level of prices in the economy. Now, deflation will generally occur when there's really weak aggregate demand in the economy, and therefore, basically, there's lots of spare capacity, and we're not putting much pressure on aggregate supply, and therefore, businesses are seeing a lack of demand for their products and reducing their prices. So, deflation is when the average level of prices in the economy is decreasing. Disinflation, which is probably the harder one, is when prices are rising, but not as fast as they did in the previous period. So, for example, if an economy had 5% inflation in year 1 and then 2.9% inflation in year 2, we would say that they're experiencing disinflation. They're still experiencing inflation, it's just not as high as what it was last year. And then we also have a term called hyperinflation, which is an extreme situation where prices are rising very quickly. The strict definition of hyperinflation is that prices are actually doubling every single day. So it's very rare and has only really happened in a few instances. One in Zimbabwe, one in Germany after they printed lots and lots of money back in the 1920s after the war. So if you look at this graph here with China and India, you can see that India has experienced, basically their inflation rate never goes below 0%. So every single year here, India has experienced positive inflation. Now, it's because every year it's been above 0%. Now, even in this period here where inflation is clearly sort of not as fast as it was back in the previous year, it still means prices have gone up in that year. So in the year, for example, 2010, prices may not have gone up as fast as they did in 2009, but their prices are still increasing. They're still well above zero. Deflation will only occur if the prices drop, if the prices are going down, which basically means they will be below zero. So China experienced deflation in 2009. The average level of prices in China actually went down that year. But when all these other times where we're just seeing drops in prices, just a drop in the graph, not a drop in prices, they're only experiencing disinflation, not deflation. So looking at the graph above, China only experienced deflation in 2009. Every other year inflation was positive. They did, however, experience disinflation on numerous occasions, particularly in 2008, so this period here, and 2011, so we're looking at this period here, and again in 2013, they experienced disinflation in those years. So the government's goal of inflation is basically we want inflation occurring at about 2 to 3% per year, or on average over the business cycle, so on average over that 8-year period, and prices are increasing at a rate lower than our trading partners. We want our inflation to be lower than our trading partners because that helps to make us internationally competitive. So basically, if we're selling something for $100 and the US are selling something for $100, we want their prices to be rising faster than us because then people will want to buy our products and therefore we will have increased international competitiveness and sell more exports, and that will generate jobs and generate growth in our economy. You can see this is basically looking at inflation in Australia over the last 20 years, and you can see there's only been a couple of quarters where inflation has actually been negative. And inflation is negative but never been negative for a whole year. So this white line, this line at the top represents inflation from a year-on-year perspective, and every single year has been above 1%. So in Australia, every single year prices have gone up by at least 1%. They just have gone down in a couple of quarters. For example, when the GFC hit. This is the GFC hitting here, and inflation went down considerably. Sorry, didn't go down, just did not go up as quickly. A massive amount of disinflation. There are two main causes of inflation, and we'll look at this later in this chapter. But there's demand pull inflation, and that's basically caused by increased demand for products. So if you think of microeconomics, it's like the demand curve shifting to the right, leading to shortages as we get closer to our productive capacity or our limit on production. And there's also cost push inflation, which is caused by the supply curve shifting to the left, and therefore for things like natural disasters and cyclones and things like that, or higher costs of production, which mean that businesses need to raise their prices because they have higher costs of production. So this one is caused by increased demand, this one is caused by increased production costs. Inflation does not mean the economy is experiencing really high economic growth. Countries can experience really high inflation and really low growth, particularly if they have some like negative supply side shock. Next video we'll talk about measurement of inflation.